Welcome back. All right, I will try my best to navigate this and not get into the salary side of it as much as cap hits. Salaries and cap hits are very different. But I want to talk about the salary cap because we're going to be seeing guys sign extensions over the next week. We're a week out from the NHL's trade deadline, so we're going to see guys signing contract extensions. And right away, everybody's a capologist, and that's a terrible contract. That's a terrible move. What a horrible decision to make with your financial resources is going to be the argument, right? Is that's usually the argument. If it's an 8-year contract, it's too long. Nobody deserves 8 years. And if the cap hits 10 million or higher, nobody deserves that. And what are they doing? The reality is the NHL is doing really, really well, as evidenced by their speculation that the salary cap could not just go up, but skyrocket over the next few years. And I think this is being done as a way of extending an olive branch to the union from the NHL. Like, hey, here's where our money's at. You guys are going to make tons of money over the next few years. And it does mean that for players, because I've seen the question asked of why would a player want longer term, that's for job security. But I would totally understand if some of the players on this board, when their contracts are up, say, you know what, I'll sign a 2-year deal because 2 years from now the salary cap's going to be so ridiculously high. Now, there's some risk to that maybe the cap doesn't go up by as much 2 years down the road, but will any players take that risk? So this year, the salary cap for any given team is $88 million. And one player can make 20% of the salary cap, meaning 17.6 million is the most that any one player could be making in terms of cap hit. And the highest cap hit in the NHL is 13.25 million, according to Puckpedia, that being Austin Matthews. And we'll get to that. Now, next year, if it's 95.5 million as the cap for any given team, that means that a player could make 19.1 million. That'd be 20% of 95.5 million. Whereas the minimum contract stays at $775,000. I would expect that in the next CBA we'll see an increase in the minimum, but I don't think it goes up above maybe $850,000. Even though I would say the argument could be made at this point, you could pay minimum $1 million to any NHL player and still put together a pretty darn good team. So, but at any rate, usually what happens is the cap goes up, the top forwards, the stars get more money, and the guys who are going out there and giving it their best on third and fourth lines make very, very little. In comparison, I'm not saying in comparison to somebody working at a Walmart, to somebody who's working at a call center. I understand they're making a lot more money. Just saying that comparatively with players that they're playing with, they're making a lot less money. Now, 2026, 2027, the cap's supposed to go up to 104 million. That's the speculation. That would mean that a player could get $20.8 million as a salary cap hit. The following year, $113.5 million. That puts an individual cap hit at a maximum of $22.7 million. Remember, this year it's 17.6 million, and a few years from now it'll be 22.7 million. However, fans and media will still compare the cap hits to contracts that were signed before that explosion in monies. And I think that's a little bit disingenuous. So let's go through this. We'll start with Matthews. Matthews, a $13.25 million cap hit. His cap hit at signing was 15.06% of the cap. And the expiry of this contract is 2028. So that means that after the 2027-2028 season, where it's a $113.5 million cap as a max for a team, Matthews could get a huge raise. We could see him in the $17 to $18 million cap hit. I've seen expectations that Makar could get 16 to 17 million as his cap hit when his contract is up, because of how important he is and because of where the salary cap's going. So McKinnon right now, $12.6 million cap hit. At the time he signed it, that was 15.09% of the salary cap, and his contract runs until 2031. So McKinnon is well paid, absolutely. Probably could have got more than the 15.09% as McDavid did. This is where things are interesting to me too, because McDavid, $12.5 million cap hit. At the time McKinnon got that contract, I remember seeing people saying, because at the time, McKinnon was not seen as being on that same level as McDavid, and we can have that debate. But the idea was, well, how can McKinnon get more than McDavid? He signed later than McDavid. At the time McDavid signed for $12.5 million, he was getting 15.72% of the salary cap, and his contract runs until 2026. So that's how MacKinnon gets more, because MacKinnon's contract goes 5 years later, and that means that coming out of this year with a $19.1 million maximum, at the time where McDavid is getting ready to re-sign, the maximum would be $20.8 million per player. I know he's not going to get $20.8 million, but the $12.5 million, if he signs for the exact same percentage as he signed for with that contract, which is $15.72 million, his next contract would bring him in $15.01 million in terms of cap hit, thus jumping him past Matthews, at least till Matthews is expired in 2028, and jumping him past MacKinnon, and nicely so. Now, the interesting thing is, if he waited till 2028 and signed for that same 15.72% of the cap, it's $17.85 million that he could be making per season. So that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And the difference there being almost $3 million tells you there could be some star players that say, I'll take the risk. I'll sign for 2 years. And then 2 years from now, when that cap's even higher, right? So it is always interesting because people always talk about who's greedy and who's not with contracts, but every year the contracts change in perspective of what the percentage of the cap is. This is why a lot of the longer term contracts age pretty well. I've done videos on that before. Panarin, $11.64 million cap hit for him. 14.29% of the salary cap at the time that he signed it, and that runs till 2026. I don't think Panarin gets $11.64 million on his next contract. However, $11.64 million will be less than 10% of the cap in 2028. It'll be less than 10% of the cap. So how crazy is that? A guy could make $11 million and we could go, well, it's less than 10% of the cap, so that's not too bad. Crazy times. Pettersson. All the discussions about Pettersson. All of it. I'll just wait till people are done. But yeah, $11.6 million for Pettersson in Vancouver. At the time he signed it, 13.18% of the salary cap, and his contract runs until 2032. So it is something to keep in mind. I'm not saying that the contract's justified at this point. He's having a rough season, agreed, but it does run that long. It is going to be more palatable in future years than it currently is. Whether that's in Vancouver or wherever else, we shall see. But yeah, it is going to change this summer, because I think that Marner's going to get a lot more than that, and there could be others as well. Rantanen comes to mind. Erik Karlsson, $11.5 million cap hit. At the time he signed that, it was 14.11% of the salary cap. And the percentage of the cap that you're getting, I'm pretty sure comes into negotiations between the owners, between the general manager and the agent. And I'm sure the owners get involved in that as well. They have to sign off on these contracts. But Karlsson's contract runs till 2027. And for Erik Karlsson, it feels like his contract's, winding down a little bit here. I would be very surprised to see him stick around at $11.5 million. But could it be justified when the cap goes up? Maybe. Nylander in Toronto, $11.5 million cap hit, 13.07% of the cap at the time he signed it, and it runs till 2032 as well. So he signs almost the same contract as Pettersson. Nylander is signed for Toronto for a very long time. That contract will only age well. Pastrnak, $11.25 million cap hit for him. It was 13.47% of the salary cap at the time he signed it, and it runs till 2031. So Pastrnak got himself a pretty decent contract there. It expires a year before Nylander's, so he'll get a raise a year before Nylander does. Tavares is an unrestricted free agent this summer. At the time he signed his contract with the Leafs at $11 million cap hit, that was 13.84% of the cap. So more than Pastrnak, more than Nylander, more than Pettersson. It just shows the cap moving up. Dahlin, $11 million cap hit for him. His contract doesn't expire until 2032, and at the time he signed, 12.58% of the salary cap went to Dahlin. So less greedy than he might have been. And yet there will be those who will probably say, I don't know that Dahlin's worth $11 million because they don't watch him play very often because he's in Buffalo. Marner, one of the expiring contracts on the board, $10.9 million cap hit. At the time he signed it, 13.37% of the cap. And we've gone over the Toronto thing many, many times. And I think the issue people have had with Toronto has been a matter of you can sign players for this kind of cap hit, but when you sign 4 guys for really high cap hits, it does make it more difficult to field a team that's going to be able to go out there and compete come Stanley Cup playoffs time, that it's going to hurt your depth. And I think at times that has borne itself out. It really hasn't been the core 4 that's cost Toronto everything. It has been really the depth scoring is not there. You look at playoff numbers, the depth scoring just hasn't been there. And when the depth scoring is not there, well, now you can just key on the top guys, and you've got Toronto where you want them. Then there's Huberdeau, $10.5 million cap hit for him. 12.57% of the salary cap the time he signed it. So actually, it's less than everybody else. That contract runs till 2031. He's having a good year for Calgary, but he will be passed by a number of players this coming off season, and we're going to see a lot of guys getting some pretty hefty amounts of money, because the other option would be that you give that money to your third and fourth liners and your other defensemen, your backup goaltender, and in general, that's not the way that works. When the salary cap goes up, it's the star players who reap the benefits. Your mid-tier guys will reap some of the benefit, but your bottom, your minimum doesn't go up by a whole lot. The minimum was, let's see, wasn't it like 500,000 back in, I want to say 2004, I think the minimum was 500,000. So we can also point out that back before we had a salary cap, teams were already paying over 10 million for players. They were willing to throw 20 million to get guys signed. Fedorov comes to mind. There was Sakic. So owners have been making a lot of money. They've been able to pay this kind of money for a very long time. But we kind of get conditioned to look at players who are making this kind of money and go, it's greed. It's greed on their part. But we're going to see over the next few years, now that the salary cap isn't constrained by money owed through 2020 and 2021, we're going to see the numbers explode, and a lot of the guys on this board here would not qualify for the next board, say, a year from now, and especially once we get to 2027, 2028. Contracts could be absolutely insane, and yet when you compare it to, say, the NBA, Major League Baseball, or the NFL, much lower, because those leagues do generate a ton more money. And in basketball's case, it's not really fair. I've seen the comparison of NBA and the NHL. NBA rosters do not have the same amount of players as NHL rosters. It's not the same kind of revenue split. So it is a little bit of apples to oranges when you're making that comparison. But at any rate, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It is going to be a very interesting summer, and it kind of gets started with what players do between now and the trade deadline. Because if Besser signs an extension, if Rantanen signs an extension, these are contracts that then get used in July as comparisons for other general managers, for agents, and for players especially, to decide what they think they're worth. So for players that are negotiating right now, they're also kind of negotiating for their teammates and for other members of the union as well. So very interesting times ahead for the National Hockey League. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.